The endocrine system is the second major control system of the human body. It complements that fast responses of the nervous system by focusing their control on slow and protracted functions of the body, such as growth and development. Although this chapter may feel intimidating because of the number of hormones you have to get familiar with, it is more important to focus on the general principles of hormone and endocrine functions. You will most likely find that the principles by which hormone control the body functions are the same as those of any other organs and organ systems, that is, they maintain homeostasis of the body. The endocrine system consists of those ductless glands called endocrine glands that secrete hormones, as well as non-neural and neural hormone secreting cells located in the various organs such as the brain, heart, kidneys, liver, and stomach. Hormones functionally link various organ systems together. The origin of the word hormone is from the Greek, which means to impel or set into motion. This coordination is key to the maintenance of homeostasis, which is important for health and survival. In many cases, the actions of one hormone can be potentiated, inhibited, or counterbalanced by the actions of another. This illustrates the general principle of physiology that most physiological functions are controlled by multiple regulatory systems, often working in opposition, which will be especially relevant in the sections on the endocrine control of metabolism and the control of pituitary gland function. The GIF image here shows the passage of hormones when an endocrine cell or an endocrine organ or gland secretes their product, hormones. They secrete it into the bloodstream, wherein the hormone will be uh, suspended and delivered to the target cells within the body. Those cells that have receptors to particular hormones are typically called target cells. And so when they act on the target cells, they either activate or inhibit cellular processes. They can also stimulate the synthesis and release of other hormones that will induce other glands to secrete their own hormones. We call this as tropic hormones. Hormones generally affect 5 vital aspects of the human body. That is, they control homeostasis, reproduction, behavior, growth and development, and energy production, storage, and use. As you can see, most of these functions are long duration and protracted activities that is essentially controlled by the hormone system, the hormones and the endocrine system. The label figure here shows the large number of endocrine glands in the body. The names of organs in the boxes marks the classical endocrine glands, organs that have long been known as hormone-secreting organs, whereas the organs whose names are not inside boxes are secondary endocrine glands that primarily serve in non-endocrine function, such as the heart that pumps blood along the cardiovascular system, is also known now to secrete atrial natriuretic factor, which regulates sodium excretion in the kidneys and also functions in maintaining blood pressure, or the liver that secretes insulin-like growth factor. The liver is known to process metabolic products from the digestive organs, but they are also known to secrete the hormone insulin-like growth factor that regulates or that controls cell division. So you have quite a number of hormone secreting organs that we know of now, not just from distinct organs themselves, from discretely shaped organs, but also from tissues that may be found in various parts of the body, like the adipose tissue. What may also become obvious here is that the endocrine system differs from most other organ systems in the body in that their various components or organs are not anatomically connected. They do, however, show some form of system in a functional sense. There are three major chemical forms of hormones: the amine hormones, peptide hormones, and steroid hormones. The amine hormones are hormones derived from amino acid tyrosine, and they include the thyroid hormones, triiodothyronine and thyroxine, T3 and T4 respectively. And then you have the adrenal medullary hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, and dopamine from the hypothalamus. The peptide hormones are usually short chains of amino acids or long polypeptides that are secreted from the endoplasmic reticulum of the endocrine cells. They form the majority or bulk of hormones in the human body. They are secreted first as pre-prohormone or prohormone that are inactive, and then they are immediately cleaved into the activated hormone. The peptide hormones are commonly also used as neuromodulators in the nervous system. Both amine and peptide hormones are water soluble. The third chemical class of hormones are the steroid hormones derived from cholesterol. They are lipid-soluble hormones that are able to pass through the plasma membrane of the target cells and therefore bind with receptors located inside the cells, usually inside the nucleoplasm. This includes the hormones from the adrenal cortex, aldosterone, cortisol, and glucocorticoids, and from the testes and ovaries, that is the gonads, namely testosterone, estradiol, and progesterone. Because we can further differentiate hormones in two groups, the water-soluble and the lipid-soluble hormones, the way by which hormones bind to their target cells comes in two forms as well. The amine and protein hormones bind to plasma membrane-bound receptors, while the steroid hormones bind to intracellular receptors. Uh, the two groups work in similar way, biochemically altering production rates of certain substances, but at a cellular level, they trigger different mechanisms. Protein and amine hormones act on receptors at the target cell surface, whereas steroid hormones act on receptors inside the cell. Protein hormones and steroid hormones can further be differentiated by the time at which their action, effects, and deactivation occurs. Protein hormones usually act fast and are quick to become deactivated, whereas steroid hormones take time to act and be deactivated also very slowly. As a consideration and question for a forum later on, uh, we, it would be interesting to find out why steroid hormones take longer to deactivate or stop their effects. Are there non-genomic steroid hormone receptor interactions? These will be questions that will be taken up shortly in a forum. If you recall the signal transduction pathways covered in Chapter 5 on cell signaling pathways, the hormones bind and trigger responses in target cells by the same mechanisms of cell signaling pathways. In these slides, the various hormones secreted by the endocrine glands are grouped into columns under the very signal transduction pathway they trigger in the target cells. Like, for example, the adrenocorticotropic hormones, or the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone from the pituitary, um, activate cyclic ANP mechanisms. That is, they activate the adenylyl cyclase pathway. Whereas gonadotropin releasing hormone or thyroid releasing hormone or angiotensin 2 or antidiuretic hormone oxytocin, they trigger the inositol triphosphate pathway. Whereas the glucocorticoids, estrogen, progesterone, aldosterone, are steroid hormones, and so they trigger the intracellular receptor activation. Other mechanisms such as the activation of tyrosine kinase, such as that by insulin or insulin-like growth factor 1 or growth hormones, are also identified here, or the activation of guanylyl cyclase, such as that of ANP and nitric oxide. Trigger of hormone secretion may be categorized into three types of inputs to the endocrine cells. One is by changes in the blood plasma concentration of mineral ions or organic nutrients. Second is by the release of neurotransmitters released by nerve cells to the endocrine cells or gland. And thirdly is by the secretion of a hormone that acts on the endocrine cell or gland. We call these hormones as tropic hormones. In the first category, ions or nutrient substances that are found in the blood plasma are detected by receptors in the endocrine gland and triggers hormone secretion in response to such substances detected. A good example here is when calcium is high in the blood, the thyroid gland secretes calcitonin that lowers the blood calcium levels. When blood calcium levels is also very low, the parathyroid glands responds to this by secreting parathormones that trigger the release of calcium from calcium repositories such as bones, and thereby raise calcium levels in the blood. In the second category, nerve cells may act directly on endocrine glands by releasing transmitters that trigger hormone secretion. A good example here is the activation of the adrenal medulla by sympathetic nerve cells. This triggers secretion of adrenal medullary hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves can either stimulate or inhibit the secretion of hormones in many endocrine glands. The large group of hormones from the hypothalamus and pituitary glands in fact are secreted by the influence of nerve cells in the higher brain centers. The third category of hormone secretion trigger is by the stimulatory or inhibitory effect of other hormones. Hormones that trigger the secretion or release of another hormone in an endocrine gland are called tropic hormones. The classical example of tropic hormones are those of the hypothalamo-pituitary axis. The hypothalamus secrete releasing hormones that triggers the anterior pituitary to secrete their own hormones. A main feature of endocrine regulation is negative feedback. When hormones are secreted by glands, the production of the hormones acts on the previous gland to inhibit it from further secreting its hormone, and so you have negative feedback. We can use here as an example the regulation of gonadotropin releasing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone that is imposed by testosterone from the testis. You have hypothalamus that secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone that stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. The accumulation of these follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary in the blood usually inhibits the hypothalamic cells from secreting further their gonadotropin releasing hormones. And so you have a negative feedback, which in this case, because of the short distance between the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, is called short loop negative feedback. Meanwhile, the gonadotropin releasing hormone has already induced the anterior pituitary in secreting their follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone that travels down the bloodstream and will affect the gonads, like the testes, to develop their sex cells, and as well as to secrete their hormones, testosterone. Testosterone accumulates in the blood and reaches the anterior pituitary, and when it does so, it imposes an inhibitory effect on the anterior pituitary, reducing its secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And so because this distance is far-flung from the anterior pituitary, that is at the testis, the negative feedback that is produced here is a long loop negative feedback. In this other figure here shown at the bottom left of the slide, what is shown here is the upregulation and downregulation of receptors for hormones. When hormones are in very low concentration in the blood, this can induce target cells or even gland cells in the trophic cascade to increase production of the receptors and therefore resume the normal sensitivity of the target cells or gland cells to the hormones. On a different situation, when the hormones are in high quantities, this can induce the target cells or gland cells to reduce their production of receptors, and so the receptors are down-regulated, and this decreases the sensitivity of the and responsiveness of the target cells to the hormones. So in a way, receptor upregulation and downregulation can also help in the control of hormone signal mechanisms. On a third phenomenon here, we have permissiveness that is shown here, wherein a hormone enhances the effect of another hormone. In this case, we have here epinephrine that stimulates adipose cells to release fatty acids. By itself, the epinephrine can only induce adipose cells to release fatty acids in small quantities. You have here thyroid hormone that usually induces the epinephrine to induce large quantities of fatty acid release from adipose cells. But by itself, thyroid hormones have little or no effect on adipose cells to release fatty acids. But when they are present together with epinephrine, they induce large quantities of fatty acid release from the adipose cells. We call this as permissiveness, which can enhance the effects of hormones when they are present with another hormone. Endocrine disorders may be classified by the relative amounts of hormones secreted by the gland and the target cell responsiveness. Primary hyposecretion is when a gland is secreting too little hormone because it is unable to function normally by itself due to damage to tissues of the gland, enzyme deficiency, dietary deficiency, infection, or toxins. In secondary hyposecretion, a gland is secreting too little hormone because there is too little trophic hormone to stimulate it. Primary hypersecretion is when a gland itself is secreting too much hormone, while in secondary hypersecretion, there is excessive stimulation of a gland by its trophic hormone. Hyporesponsiveness is when a target cell do not respond to the hormone due to a deficiency of receptors, a defect in the signal transduction mechanism, or a deficiency of an enzyme that catalyzes the activation of the hormone. In diabetes mellitus, the target cells of the hormone insulin are hyporesponsive. Hyperresponsiveness occurs when target cells excessively respond to a hormone, such as in liver cirrhosis, which has been found to be due to hyperresponsiveness to growth hormones. As an assignment, please read the rest of Chapter 11 and answer the following questions in short PDF document and submit this by August 26, Thursday. Number 1, what are the major actions of thyroid stimulating hormone on thyroid function and growth? Number 2, define stress and the functions of cortisol during stress. Number 3, list the major hormones that control growth. Number 4, what controls the secretion of parathyroid hormone and what are the major effects of this hormone? Thank you.